Hello and welcome to Command Point once again. Today, I am here with a special guest, to talk about the newest, cool faction on the block, even though it's not really a new faction at all. I'm here with Micromancer, and today we're going to be talking about Hunter Clade, who just got a big buff. Micro, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm very curious about these robots that are these robot android people that are running around.
Yeah,
And
they've always been secretly cool.
yeah. So for starters, you've been playing Wormblade for a little bit, but you were
Right.
playing Hunter Clade, like when they came out and a little bit after that. So I guess before we talk about the buffs, I was always saying in the tier lists and in the videos and stuff that I didn't think that Hunter Clade was as bad as people made him out to be. They certainly weren't the strongest bespoke team. But how did you feel they stacked up before all these big changes that just came out?
Yeah, I think before these buffs, they were in a better spot than most people give them credit for. Um, I think they had maybe a higher skill floor because the team could fall apart really quickly. But played at a high level, I think they only really struggled against maybe Vetguard and Pathfinders.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, I think they had good matchups, or at least doable matchups into every other team out there.
Yeah, it seemed like the shooty hordes were kind of giving them trouble, but outside of that, I mean, they had a great matchup into commandos, right? I've heard people
Right.
say.
They had a
People,
great matchup into Troop,
okay,
um, and good matchups into Warp Coven, which was one of the other big baddies at the time.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So I guess like we can go over the changes really quick. I mean,
Hmm.
we've pretty much everybody knows what they are at this point. So here's what we'll do. We're gonna go over. I'm gonna touch each one of the new changes, and you're
Hmm.
gonna tell me how important the change is. Okay. So we'll go one
Sure.
at a time. How about let's start with the first one, the easiest like one to wrap your head around. They get one extra operative, which actually is, and it's going to end up being a Secarian, and I'm sure you can explain that to us. But yeah, 11th operative. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest change, and it's pretty massive. Like I'm a huge fan of activations.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're the strongest. Extra activations are pretty much one of the strongest tools in the game. Um, Even just having an extra body, and like even if it had just been an extra Scutari, that would have been massive on its own. Being able to take an extra Secarian is pretty great. It really catapults the team up into a spot where it can be competitive with anyone out there.
Right. I mean, it's funny. I mean, you probably think about this too, but like as a Wormblade player, Wormblade's like a
Yeah,
horde, and now like Hunter Clade has more activations than Wormblade.
yeah. Like the only teams that out activate us as Hunter Clade now are Vet Guard, Pathfinders, and Trader Guard. I think.
Yeah. Unless you go in a
Um,
compendium, there's a couple.
right. And we're tied with like turn one Wormblade.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just like had a great tournament run off of abusing that extra turn one activation on
Oh,
Wormblade.
me too, man.
um,
It's necessary.
yeah, having 11 activations every turn is it's really strong.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So I guess let's move on to the next easiest one to
Hmm.
wrap your head around, and that would be they get a third gunner, which it basically means they can take the arquebus now, whereas before you really weren't, or were you? I mean, talk to us about the arquebus.
I've always had it on my roster. It's been a situational piece for me into like certain elite teams, or if there was a spot on a map where you could just kind of park it and then abuse obscurity with its gigantic base and omnispecs to ignore it for yourself. So it's always been a situational tool before. Um, I think it might still be a situational tool even after this upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an auto take. Um, it's always going to have mobility problems, and it's just not going to be as useful as the other gunners.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, I think your backline as Hunter Clade is often a little crowded between your two gunners, You usually have your surveyor back there trying to pass like your plasma gun APL. You'll have your dictate back there for a while to give you the the surveyor back there to omnispec for your gunners. And so you just start to run out of hiding places and like the shots that are going to be available. There's only going to be so many shots a turn that you're going to be able to get from your back line.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's maybe limited use here. I think if you are including the arquebus, consider taking maybe the arc rifle as a vanguard instead of a ranger.
Okay.
With pursuers, you can still flip 2 rangers over to from conceal to engaged. And so those 2 rangers could be your plasma gun and your arquebus, and you can still flip your third any model over, which could be your arc rifle. But if he's a vanguard, that just lets him move out on the board easier, grab objectives, and leave the back line to the other gunners.
Really interesting. So my opinion on it when I first saw the fact that you could take that arquebus now, and let me know how this sounds because you're talking about the backline getting crowded.
Right.
It seems like, and tell me if you agree, it would be easier to take that model and like the triple gunner setup on like a loot and salvage or a seized ground with the wider backline deployment zones rather than like a domination or like one of the corner objectives maybe.
Yeah, I'd agree. It also depends on the maps. Like there's a wide variety of board setups out there, going from like a lot of terrain to very little.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of heavy terrain to work with and like a wide deployment, it becomes a lot easier to do something like that. Whereas if you're stuck with just one piece of heavy in your deployment area or something like that, you're going to find it a little tough.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some missions, I guess, map setups where that arquebus base it can get some weird obscurity shenanigans going on.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess, yeah,
it's a big boy.
Oh, definitely, he's massive.
Right.
And now, okay, let's move on to the next change. So the less obvious things. So for starters, the being able to change your Doctrina imperative. I can't believe I got that in the first try. Being able to change it every turn now instead of twice a game or once a game from the initial one.
Mm-hmm.
So how big of a deal is that?
I think it's a bigger deal than the gunner change. Not as big as extra activation.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously very nice. Like some of the deprecations were pretty harsh. Even on the useful doctrines, like I used aggressor a lot pre-buff, in conjunction with rust stalkers, but the deprecation works like the rust stalkers have the buff where if they're in cover they get 2 auto retains. Aggressor's deprecation is you can't auto retain.
Yes. So just to be clear, the aggressor one, that's the you get to re-roll a hit in melee.
No, that's Conqueror. Aggressor is the
fast
+1 move characteristic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it lets you get the charges extra far. It lets you get shots that you might not normally be able to get otherwise.
Yes.
But it came at a steep cost in the past.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But now, I guess that segues into the other thing. On the first turn that you use the imperatives, you do not get the deprecation. So, where do we rank that in terms of how big the changes are here?
It's pretty good. It opens up a lot more flexibility. Often beforehand, you were like kind of on a clock with what you needed to do with each imperative because you had to switch it. And well, you usually had to switch it due to your secondaries.
Right.
And you couldn't go back to it afterwards. So there were like certain things you needed to get done while each one was active. Being able to just decide, it's like, hey, I don't need... I can come back to this one later and like round that out. Gives you a lot of freedom. Also, before it was just such a big commitment to change because you were committing to changing for the rest of the game at that point.
Yeah.
So it had to be kind of more of a plan that you had going into the game. It's like, I'm doing this turn 1 and then this turn 2 onwards. Where it didn't really leave much room for looking at how the board developed and being like, okay, this is what I need now.
Yeah, and I mean,
So,
you kind of mentioned the TAC op, but the calculated eradication, I think, gets a really
yeah,
nice
that's right.
buff from some of these changes.
Yeah, it was already a good tac op. I was taking it almost every game. Before the change, after the change, it's just
Yeah,
a shoe in, I think.
easily their best for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's a fifth change that's not really a Hunter Clade change, but I want to hear your thoughts on it because I think it impacts Hunter Clade, and that's the grenade thing where everybody has less grenades. So
Yeah.
obviously Hunter Clade is one of the teams that does not have grenades. So naturally they're going to like seeing less grenades on the board. But how big of a deal is it for Hunter Clade in your opinion?
Um, it kind of compounds on top of these other changes. They interact in interesting ways. But it's a pretty big deal. Like the teams that were giving us a lot of trouble, um, like Vetguard, Novitiates was always a tough matchup. It was really the crack grenades in those matchups that were making it tough. So being able to worry less about those is really good. And then also before, those grenades were often, they were being timed to hit you on the turn that you had aggressor up. And you weren't getting your auto retains.
Yeah.
So now you only have to worry about one crack grenade, and you're probably going to get your 2 auto saves
Yeah.
on it as well. So it's much, much less scary now.
And I mean, it seemed like before they were kind of like a Vetguard player, for instance, would be reserving those crack grenades for the Secarians. Not only do they have less crack grenades, but there's now more Secarians.
Yeah.
And they're not having to worry about the deprecation from like aggressor, like you mentioned. So
Right.
I mean, lots of things compounding, and we got a pretty good team now on our hands. So I'm gonna get a hot take from you right now, Micro.
Okay.
How good? How good is the new Clade in terms of like? Would you say they're top 3, top 4, top 2? Where do we feel about this?
Yeah. I feel like Pathfinder still takes the cake at the top of the list.
I agree.
And they're still a team that's going to give us a lot of trouble. And I think there's a level just behind Pathfinders where there's a lot of teams right now.
Okay.
I kind of put Novitiates, Clade, Wormblade there, Vetguard. It maybe Clade might be at the top of that stack, but honestly, like that level of team is just so close together that it's almost not worth differentiating, in my opinion.
To me, it's they're really close with Novitiates. I have them, I think, 3rd or something. But I guess as far as the Novitiates matchup, that's one that I've talked to a lot of people about. And it feels like everybody has a different opinion on it. Because it seems clear that they definitely lost to Vetguard and Pathfinders before. Maybe they don't lose to Vetguard anymore. Maybe they do. But how do you feel about the Novitiate matchup now?
I think it's good. Like it's I think it makes for a fun game. I might give Clade a little bit of an edge. I on one hand, like Clade really can struggle with tricky teams that can either like shoot from conceal or like flip back to conceal. We don't really have tactics of our own to duplicate that. So things like the Novitiate Condemner bolt gun. Sorry, is that the right one? The crossbow that stays silent the whole game?
Yes, the Condemner, yeah.
Yeah, things like that can really give Clade trouble. So I think it's a good matchup though, because Clade still has a lot of tools against them. Our melee is really strong against 7 Moon models, and we have enough dice that it's not something that, like, if you get your charge off against a Novitiate, they can't faith point cheat their way out of dying on that one. So I think we have the bodies and the melee to kind of just outbully them.
Right.
But it's faith points are so good. Like
Definitely. Yeah,
it's
they're insane.
yeah, it's hard to underestimate. Um,
I mean, I would say that even the buffed version of the imperatives as like a special faction ability is probably still not nearly as good as faith points as a mechanic.
right.
I think faith points is probably the best mechanic in the game because every
Yeah.
specialist team seems to have their special thing.
Right. And the imperatives, apart from aggressor's nice because it's just a bonus to all your models. You get your +1 movement,
Yeah.
like thumbs up. The other ones, even without the deprecation, they're relatively tempered buffs. It's like if you fail 2 rolls, you get to reroll 1.
Yeah.
And your dice are such that that doesn't often, like, you're not always going to fail 2 rolls.
Yeah.
So it just kind of helps balance your dice out more than really pushing you over the edge anywhere.
It saves you from whiffing, I guess.
Yeah,
Which is pretty
exactly.
nice.
It's like it kind of helps just level you out a bit.
Yeah.
Whereas faith points, they just kind of push you into that absurd level of
Yeah.
well, no, this is gonna work.
Faith points is like wherever you rolled, you're gonna be better than that. Doesn't matter how good you rolled, unless you rolled like all sixes, then it can't be better. But
Right.
whereas Clade's imperatives are kind of saying, if you rolled bad, we're gonna try and help you out. But if you're already rolling good, like, congrats, you're set.
Right.
But yeah, okay. So yeah, Novitiate, they're very strong. I would definitely expect that to be kind of a like more an even matchup at this point. I guess one of the big problems with Hunter Clade, and this is something I want to touch on, was first of all, nobody was really playing them. So
Right.
even if they were good, you're not going to see them winning tournaments because nobody's playing them. The other thing was they weren't easy to play. So that combination was like their win rate was horrible. They weren't getting anywhere in tournaments really for the most part, except for a couple couple good players like yourself and like Alex Squares would show up and do well with them, but that was about it. So do you think these changes help with the floor a lot? Do you think that this, like, obviously it helps the floor, so like
Yeah.
more players can pick them up, but do you think it makes them a team that has like a good floor, or do you think they still have a high skill floor before you can like a high
Yeah.
entry
It is
level?
going to raise the floor quite a bit, I think. You can still run into trouble with them. They're going to be a lot more forgiving now, though.
Okay.
Players, like newer players, aren't going to run into as many trouble, like just getting caught with the wrong imperative and just being like, oh, I guess I just. They might not even realize what's going on, but they're kind of. They used to be able to just kind of lose themselves a game because they switched an imperative on turn 2 to something that's not going to help them later.
Yeah.
And just having like more 10 wound bodies is it's just a bigger wound pool. Like Secarians are almost as good as like Marines, right? Like
They're close. It's like the rest talkers are almost like little like locusts from Gene Stealer Cult or the Wormblade.
yeah. Like when you consider that Marine teams used to have 5 models, right?
Yeah.
You get 5 rust stalkers, which aren't quite Marines, but that's okay because you have an entire other fire team with
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
right? On top of that.
I mean,
So
it is weird how Hunter Clade is kind of structured almost like a compendium team, where like you've got a fire team of Secarians, and then you've got a fire team of Scutari, but they just have way more rules. So
yeah, I've always really appreciated them. They're like even back to Kill Team 18. I've always been a big fan of like mixed teams where there's quite a bit of like shooting and melee at the same time.
yeah,
And I don't think that there's been a team that really like embodies that as much as Hunter Clade in the new edition.
for sure. Yeah,
They just have, they have their shooting models on half their team. They have half the team being melee. I mean, I guess they can swing harder into shooting if you go infiltrators and just height. But
or or
The
you
melee's
can
there
just.
if you want it, right?
It's technically possible to just not take Secarians if you're feeling like a madman.
Yeah.
I suppose you can go all Scutari.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Mhm.
advise that though.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see what you're saying about them being a very like flexy team, kind of. Like Vetguard, you look at them; they're almost exclusively a shooting team. Pathfinders too, Wormblade, other than like a cult agent, is going to be mostly shooty. I guess Warp
Hmm.
Coven a little bit is kind of a flex team with some
Yeah.
melee.
They're Warp Coven's another good example of that. I kind of classify them as the opposite of the kind of like the mirror image of Wormblade,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it's like mostly melee and then a few really good strong shooting models, like probably two,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
and then whereas yeah, Wormblade is all shooting and then one or two strong melee models.
Yeah, 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 I see that for sure. So, I mean, I guess before, I mean, needless to say, I'm assuming you weren't on the train of like a lot of people said Hunter Clade was the worst bespoke team before the buffs. Did you have
Mhm.
that opinion?
No, I've personally always had them higher than Commandos
Okay,
and Warp Coven.
okay. I felt like it was once Corsairs came in, I
Yeah,
liked Clade more than that team, and then
right.
yeah,
Yeah, I think Corsairs kind of has to take the cake as bottom team of
Blooded.
that in the moment. Corsairs, or I guess there's Trader Guard too, can
Yeah,
make an argument
Blooded are
for.
pretty rough right now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I guess looking at it now, I mean the it is interesting because it seems like as the new box has come out, because we had Octarius, which were two one. I mean, in hindsight, it was one really strong team and another solid team, and then
Hmm.
we had Chalnath, which was just two insane teams. So it seemed
Right.
like for a minute we had a lot of power creep going on, but since then it's kind of like the teams have been getting like weaker, with
Yeah.
the exception of Void Dancers. So I guess a team like this, like Hunter Clay, kind of suddenly like bursting at the top of the scene all of a sudden, at like in the top of tier lists and such. I feel like we're not going to see that very often, and I think a lot of
Right.
people right now aren't like realizing how kind of special this is at the moment. Like I don't know if special is the right
Yeah.
word, but it's gonna be weird because I don't think we're gonna see this very often.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing from GW, right? Like the first balance data slate that we saw, it they we saw a few buffs to stuff that was kind of abusive at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, a few nerfs, and then we saw some buffs to stuff that like was just kind of like compendium garbage tier, where
Yeah,
they were like, hey, here's an extra body, right?
yeah,
Not only is this the most like extensive buff, like they didn't change one thing, they changed multiple
yeah.
things,
Mm-hmm.
and it I also think this was kind of like people just were complaining about this team, right? And it's that complaining uh, pushed pushed it here because I think, like you said, we both agree that they weren't actually the bottom like bespoke team, right?
I would agree with that
Um,
because
but I
a lot
guess
of people
yeah,
said that, and it just always seemed wrong to me. I don't know.
yeah. So it's interesting. Like I think the buffs that they did, they put this team in a really good spot to compete with like the best of the best teams out there.
Yeah,
I worry if they went maybe a little overboard and if they shouldn't have just dialed down those top teams a bit more
right.
and just been a little more tame with these buffs, just so that rather than competing with the top of the top, we would just kind of like, keep cutting the grass down so that you can have fun games with everybody.
Yeah. So I guess assuming that this was the route they're going to take going forward, I guess with the exception of Blooded because they're so new,
Right.
would you say that Corsairs are the next team that they should look at, or maybe Commandos, or
Um, yeah, I'd say Corsairs are most in need of it. Commandos aren't in a bad spot. I think, like in the end, Commandos, even though I rate them fairly low as a bespoke team, um, I think there's still a lot that people can do with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think ploys like oh, it's been a while since I've played Commandos, but the the start somebody wherever you want ploy um, by like heavy terrain. You know
Yes.
what am I thinking of here?
Sneaky Git.
Sneaky Git, yeah. I think that ploy is one of the strongest tools in the game on a team like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the commandos like are so varied in what each model brings, and just having the flexibility to like look at a certain matchup and a certain board and just put certain models wherever you want is something that a really strong player can use and go really far with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also something that takes a lot of experience. So I think commandos are actually in an okay spot right now. Um, Whereas Corsairs, I mean, at the very least, they need another body, and they probably need a bit more.
I would agree with that. I mean, it seems like they're kind of. I was surprised with the way they did the Clade ones because it's like they kind of went beyond just like one extra body, like super clean, simple thing. It was like they're changing the timings on things and
Mm-hmm.
giving more moments for you to do things. So that was pretty shocking.
Right.
Before I would have just said, yeah, give Corsairs an extra body. But
Yeah.
now I wonder like what like direction could they even go in with that kind of team. But honestly, as like we said before, Corsairs might not even be the worst team because Blooded now exists, and with the
Mm-hmm.
grenade nerf, it's just not looking good for him.
Yeah.
Um,
Bloodhead's a tricky one. I don't know where you even start with that.
yeah,
I think it's a relatively weak archetype, just like a melee horde,
yeah,
and then it's like their token thing is just not as good as a lot of these other teams
right.
special rules. So it feels like you need a lot of changes on that to bring them up to a competitive level.
Yeah, I mean I'm biased maybe, but I think demons are a better melee horde than Blooded.
Yeah, for sure. Like they're more likely to kill stuff when they get in there,
Yeah,
and they can actually take more hits. Like especially if you're rocking those Nurgle
yeah,
boys.
the Plague Boys. Yeah, I
Yeah,
just watched a tournament game last night of somebody running 12 Plague pairs,
yeah.
and it's just kind of funny how much of a problem that can be. Just
Hmm.
like throwing them forward and not even really just throwing
Yeah.
caution to the wind.
Speaking of Plague Boys, they're they're actually relatively similar to the Skitarii Rangers, or sorry, the
Hmm.
Vanguard,
Oh
with
yeah,
their Rad Tat aura.
yeah.
Um, and I think just some advice for newer players, or even more experienced players that are like new to this faction. Um, Vanguard make just a terrifying front line. Um, if the team feels like it's like set up to be like Secarians in the front, and then like your Skitarii in the back, but flipping that around a little bit and leading with your like Shock Trooper and like your Alpha can be super strong because um, if you just have like a concealed model in the center of the board behind cover, all of a sudden it becomes a huge problem for your opponent to actually kill when their ways of killing that are either charge it or come within 2 inches to shoot it. Excuse me, and be affected by that Radsat aura.
Hmm.
There's like a lot of models that are normally very deadly that just will whiff against the Vanguard, and that will expose them to your like Secarians ready to countercharge, or maybe they had to flip to engage, but you can shoot them now.
Okay, that's super interesting to know because I'm kind of I've had a bunch of Scutari sitting around like mostly painted for like a couple of years now,
Mm-hmm.
and like I know Ryan's got some like he's got 5 Secarians just sitting around, so
Right.
it's like we could kind of just like play that team, but we just haven't. Um, and there was one last thing I wanted to ask you about because I know people are going to ask this question, and I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of curious myself. For those Secarians, those 5 Secarians you're always going to be taking, how do you
Right.
decide when to take Rust Stalkers and when to take Infiltrators and what the like kind of split should be?
Right. Um, okay. It's not like an easy answer.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a big fan of doing like a very one-sided split, like almost either like all or almost all
Hmm.
infiltrators or rust stalkers,
Okay.
rather than like a 50-50 thing. Um, I feel like that helps you get more play out of your tactics, whether it's like the neurostatic interference to turn off rerolls, like doing that off of 5 models will shut down the whole board. If you only bring like 2 infiltrators and one of them dies turn one, all of a sudden you just have like a 6-inch area, and that
Yeah.
bubble's just not going to be where you need it to be, right?
Hmm.
And then same with the fight twice, like it kind of doing a lopsided muster um, makes your tactics more efficient. Um, so I guess maybe first thing to look at would be: do you need neurostatic interference in the matchup?
Hmm.
Are there really important rerolls that you need to turn off? Like if you're playing against Grey Knights or Warp Coven, for example, like those are teams that live off of their relentless. Um, so that would be an indicator that you should go infiltrators. Um, the other thing to look at is it a team that I can melee against, or is it a team where I really just want to stand back and shoot?
Hmm.
For example, against Commandos, they only have a few shooting models. If they get into a shooting fight with a Clade team, they're just going to lose.
Right.
So you can take infiltrators in that matchup and just stand back and just wear them down with attrition, right?
Hmm.
Um, so those are kind of like the two things you're looking for to take infiltrators. Either you don't want a melee, or there's rerolls that you need to turn off. Um, and so once you've decided whether you're going either mostly infiltrators or mostly rust stalkers, then I like to look at it and decide whether I want to take one of the other things, because there's some things that you can only do with those models. Like often if I'm going mostly rust stalkers, there's still something that I can accomplish with a forward deployed model. Um, and only infiltrators can do that.
Hmm.
So often, even if the matchup is calling for rust stalkers on a mission like loot and salvage, it can be good to take an infiltrator anyways, just to like throw it out on the board and like grab a point you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Um, or you can look at like if on a mission like what domination, having one rust stalker with optimized gate, um, he can kind of run down the edge of the board on turn like 3 or 4, just hopping over things with a servo skull, and like flip one of those objectives that the your opponent's like deep in his deployment zone, and just flip that on turn 3 or 4 and make a big point swing.
Hmm.
And that's something that you can only kind of do with optimized gate.
Yeah.
So once, even if the matchup isn't calling for it, if the mission is calling for a model like that, that's when you start to include like do it like a 4-1 split instead of like a straight 5-0.
Gotcha. All right. And last question. Do you ever take a Secarian leader?
I personally don't.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of people do that. People seem to like the alpha, which makes
Yeah,
sense to me.
the alpha's a monster.
Hmm.
The Secarian leader, it's not that he's not good, he's just a relatively small upgrade
Yep.
to the other Secarians. Um, you can make an argument for the infiltrator one on a like a really mission action intensive mission, because he comes with his own free serval skull. But it seems like you can already take a serval skull if you just pay the EP for it.
Right.
Uh, you don't really need to, and sometimes playing too hard for points at the expense of like killing enemy models is just a good way to get a point lead and then lose in the late game.
Yeah. And honestly, I think with the equipment options that Clade have, it's not a tough choice to take a servo skull when you have the option to.
Yeah, if there are mission actions to do,
Yeah.
you pretty much just auto include it.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, I think we kind of covered all the things that I wanted to talk about post data slate buffs. So thank you, Micro, for coming on and talking to me about Hunter Clade. I'm looking forward to see you and lots of other people play them now. Before there was like nobody playing them, and now we're gonna
Yeah,
have a bunch running around. So it's gonna be really cool to see.
yeah.
Uh,
Thanks for having me on.
yeah, absolutely. All right. So everybody, thank you for watching. Shout out to all our subscribers. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed, consider doing that. We're so close to 6,000. It would be wonderful if we got there soon. And yeah, shout out to the patrons as always. And outside of that, this is Shane talking about Hunter Clade. Have a good one.